It was a chilly morning in New York City, the kind of cold that cut right through your coat, seeping into your bones. The streets were crowded with people rushing to work, heads down, eyes focused on their phones, trying to avoid the biting wind. Among them, there was one man who didn't fit in. He was walking slowly, his clothes ragged, his shoes worn down to nothing. His name was Ryan, and his life had been anything but ordinary. As he shuffled down the sidewalk, his hand reached into his pocket. There was nothing there. No wallet, no phone, just the emptiness that had consumed him for far too long. He hadn't eaten in hours, his stomach growling, the cold biting at his face. But today felt different. Something was about to change. As he walked past a group of businessmen, one of them caught his eye. A tall man with a confident stride, wearing an expensive suit and a red tie. Ryan froze for a moment. He recognized him instantly, none other than Donald Trump, the billionaire businessman turned media mogul. Ryan had seen him on TV countless times, in the media, in headlines. The man who seemed untouchable, who had everything: money, power, influence. Ryan had once dreamed of a life like that, back when things were different. But now, standing on the streets of New York with nothing but the clothes on his back, that dream felt so far out of reach. In a moment of desperation, Ryan stepped forward. He wasn't sure what made him do it. Maybe it was the cold, or the hunger gnawing at his insides. Maybe it was the years of failure that had finally caught up with him. But before he could think twice, the words slipped out. "Excuse me, sir," Ryan said, his voice shaking. "Could you spare $1?" Trump stopped in his tracks, glancing down at the homeless man in front of him. The world seemed to slow for a moment. Ryan's heart raced. What would this man do? What would he say? Would he ignore him? Laugh at him? Or maybe, just maybe, he'd do something different. The crowd around them began to notice the exchange. Whispers spread quickly. People paused in their busy routines, intrigued by the unlikely meeting between the homeless man and the wealthy business tycoon. Ryan's eyes locked with Trump's, waiting for a response. And then, without saying a word, Trump did something that Ryan never expected. Trump took a step closer, his face serious, and looked Ryan in the eye. For a brief second, it seemed like the world around them had faded away, leaving just the two of them in that moment. What happened next would change Ryan's life forever. But first, let me ask you, what would you do if you were in Ryan's shoes? Would you ask for help, or would you find another way? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ryan had once been just like the men in business suits he saw hustling by every day. He wasn't always the man standing at the corner of 42nd Street, ragged and hungry. He used to have a different life, a life full of hope, ambition, and dreams of making it big. But that was a long time ago. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, Ryan had always been the bright one. He graduated at the top of his class, went to college on a scholarship, and found his first job right out of school in a promising tech startup. Everything seemed to be going his way. He had a beautiful wife, a young daughter, and an apartment in a bustling city, just like he had always dreamed of. His career was on an upward trajectory. He had everything he thought he wanted. But life, as it often does, threw curveballs. Ryan's marriage started to fall apart. The stress of work, the long hours, the constant pressure. It began to take its toll on his personal life. His wife, Lisa, grew distant. They fought more than they talked, and soon, they were just two strangers living under the same roof. His daughter, Emma, became a reminder of everything he had lost, everything that was slipping away. One day, after an argument that went too far, Lisa left. She took Emma with her. Ryan didn't fight it. He didn't know how to anymore. He was alone. His work life began to suffer. The long hours turned into late nights, and those nights turned into weeks. The stress became unbearable, and Ryan started to lean on something that would destroy him: alcohol. At first, it was just a drink after work, to unwind. But it quickly spiraled. He missed meetings, made bad decisions, and eventually, his company let him go. It wasn't long before he lost everything: his job, his home, his family, and with that, his sense of self-worth shattered. Ryan found himself on the streets of New York City, a man without a home, without a family, and without hope. The first few nights on the streets were the hardest. He slept in alleyways, scavenged for food, and tried to avoid the kind of eye contact that might reveal just how desperate he had become. But over time, the fear and shame became a numbness, a dull ache he could barely feel anymore. Even though he had been reduced to nothing, Ryan still held on to something. A flicker of hope. A belief, deep down, that things could turn around, that he could find a way to rebuild his life. But it was hard to keep that hope alive when each day seemed like an endless struggle. And then, on that cold winter morning, Ryan found himself standing in front of Donald Trump. Of all the people he could have asked for help, it had to be Trump. The man who seemed to have everything. The man who, Ryan thought, would never understand the desperation of someone like him. But at that moment, Ryan didn't care about that. He just needed help, any help, and the only thing he could think to do was ask. Now, standing there, waiting for Trump's response, Ryan's heart beat faster. He couldn't help but wonder, was this his last chance? Had he hit rock bottom? Or was there still something left inside him to fight for? Trump's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than Ryan expected, and then, something in those eyes seemed to soften. The crowd had started to gather around them, sensing the tension in the air. Ryan had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, this moment was about to change everything. But the real question was, would Trump help him, or would Ryan walk away, still lost in the world he had created for himself? Stay tuned for what happens next. As Ryan stood there, the cold biting at his skin and his heart racing, he couldn't help but wonder what was going on in Trump's mind. The man in front of him was a walking enigma, someone whose name was known across the globe, who seemed to have conquered every challenge life threw his way. But did he really have it all? Was his life as perfect as it seemed, or had he faced struggles of his own? To understand what was happening, we have to take a look at Donald Trump's past, a past full of contradictions, as it turned out. Trump's journey wasn't as straightforward as the public might have assumed. Yes, he was born into wealth, the son of Fred Trump, a successful real estate developer in Queens. From an early age, he had the kind of advantages that most people could only dream of: private schools, connections, and the promise of a future in the family business. But that didn't mean everything came easy. Trump's relationship with his father was complex. Fred Trump was known to be a tough, no-nonsense man, and while he instilled a strong work ethic in his son, he also imposed incredibly high expectations. Donald Trump felt the pressure of those expectations every day, the weight of living up to his father's legacy. But more than that, Donald always wanted to prove himself, prove that he could be more than just his father's shadow. He attended Fordham University and then transferred to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned a degree in economics. From there, he took over his father's real estate business, and that's when the real challenges began. Trump wasn't satisfied with just running the family business in Queens. He wanted to make a name for himself in Manhattan, the heart of New York's real estate world. But breaking into Manhattan's elite circle wasn't easy. In the early years, Trump faced rejection, skepticism, and failure. He poured his energy into massive real estate deals, but more often than not, they didn't go as planned. There were bankruptcies, lawsuits, and near collapses of his empire. Trump's reputation was on the line, and he struggled to stay afloat despite his wealthy background. But Trump wasn't the type to back down. He bounced back from every setback, bigger and more ambitious than ever. He built Trump Tower in the mid-1980s, a bold move that solidified his presence in Manhattan. Slowly, people began to see him not just as Fred Trump's son, but as a self-made mogul. Yet, even as his business empire grew, his personal life remained in turmoil. He had been married twice, first to Ivana Trump, with whom he had 3 children, and later to Marla Maples. Both marriages ended in divorce, fueling the public's perception of him as a man of contradictions. On one hand, he was seen as the embodiment of success, a man who could overcome anything. On the other, he was constantly embroiled in scandals, battles, and personal chaos. Despite it all, Trump's name became synonymous with success, power, and of course, wealth. People admired his ability to persevere through obstacles, but many also saw him as a symbol of a ruthless, dog-eat-dog world. a world where only the strongest survived. Ryan, as he stood before him now, wasn't aware of all these details. All he knew was that Trump was the man with the answers, the man who had made it through the storm and come out on top. And yet, Ryan couldn't shake the thought that maybe Trump, too, had faced his own hardships. Maybe there was more to him than the media image, the billionaire who didn't have to answer to anyone. Trump, as he stood there looking at Ryan, seemed to be lost in thought for a moment. Ryan could see the wheels turning behind his sharp eyes, as if Trump were measuring him up, weighing his next words carefully. Ryan's gut twisted with anticipation. What was Trump going to say? Just then, Trump spoke. "You know," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I've seen a lot of people in my life. Some are born into money, some make their own, and some, well, some just get stuck." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. Was Trump talking about him? Had he somehow figured it out? It felt like a punch to the gut and a glimmer of hope all at once. Trump continued, his gaze never leaving Ryan. "The thing is, money doesn't fix everything. It never has. It can buy comfort, sure. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what's really worth fighting for?" Ryan didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected this kind of answer, not from someone like Trump. It wasn't the kind of response he had rehearsed in his mind when he had first mustered the courage to ask for $1. He had hoped for something simpler, something immediate, just a little relief. But now, it seemed like Trump was offering something much bigger. A challenge. Ryan felt a mix of confusion and hope swelling inside him. Maybe Trump wasn't going to just hand him $1. Maybe what Ryan needed wasn't money at all. It was a change in perspective. But what exactly was Trump asking of him? As the crowd around them continued to whisper, Ryan realized he was standing at a crossroads. The answer he was about to hear might not be what he expected, but it could be the start of something bigger, something that could finally pull him out of the darkness. Trump looked at him one last time, as if waiting for Ryan to absorb his words. And then, in a tone that held a bit of a challenge, he said, "So, what are you going to do about it?" Ryan's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come here asking for $1, but what he was getting in return was something far more valuable. It wasn't just money. It was an invitation to change. What will Ryan do next? Will he rise to the challenge or continue down the path of despair? The story isn't over yet. Stay tuned for what happens next. Ryan stood frozen, his mind racing. Trump's words echoed in his ears, each syllable lingering in the cold morning air. What are you going to do about it? The question was simple, yet profound. It felt like a mirror being held up to his life, a reflection of everything he had become. The crowd around them had grown, their murmurs growing louder as they watched the exchange unfold. Ryan could feel their eyes on him, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Trump. The businessman had asked him a question that Ryan had never really considered in such stark terms. What was he going to do about it? In the depths of his soul, Ryan had always believed he was stuck, trapped in a life he had no control over. But here, in front of him, stood a man who had climbed from failure to success, who had faced rejection and loss and come out stronger on the other side. Could it be possible? Could he, too, change his fate? For a moment, Ryan thought about just walking away. It would be easier, wouldn't it? He could return to the familiar. His spot on the sidewalk, the routine of asking for spare change, the quiet acceptance that he had nothing left to lose. But then, another thought struck him. What if this was his chance? What if this was the moment that could change everything? The temptation to simply ask for $1, to take what Trump might offer, was strong. Ryan was hungry, cold, and desperate. $1 might buy him a meal, or maybe a warm cup of coffee to get through the day. But as he stood there, he realized something. $1 wouldn't fix his problems. $1 wouldn't change the mess he had made of his life. Ryan thought back to the time when he had it all, when he was on top of the world, when he believed that everything could be bought with hard work and determination. But he had lost that belief somewhere along the way. The pain of losing his family, his job, his dignity. He had buried it all beneath a veneer of apathy and alcohol. But Trump's words had cut through that veneer. Ryan realized he didn't want a handout. What he wanted, what he truly needed, was a way to climb out of the hole he had dug for himself. And maybe, just maybe, He could find a way to do that if he was willing to fight. Ryan took a deep breath and looked Trump in the eye. "I don't want your dollar," he said, surprising even himself. "What I want is a chance. A chance to rebuild." Trump's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps respect, or maybe even understanding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. Ryan swallowed hard, his voice shaking a little as he continued, "I know I've messed up. I know I've made mistakes. But I'm tired of being stuck. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." The crowd around them grew still, watching the conversation unfold with bated breath. It was clear that this wasn't just about one man asking for help. It was about something much deeper. It was about dignity, self-worth, and the hope of starting over, no matter how impossible it seemed. Trump studied Ryan for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Well," he said, his voice steady but soft, "that's the first step. Admitting you need help is the hardest part. The rest is up to you." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. Was that it? Was that all it took? Was he truly being given a second chance? Trump continued, his tone taking on a more serious edge. "But let me be clear. Rebuilding your life isn't about asking for a dollar or waiting for someone else to fix it for you. It's about taking responsibility for what happened and having the courage to face the challenges ahead. You won't always get things right, but you have to keep pushing forward." Ryan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. This wasn't the answer he had expected, but it was the answer he needed. Trump wasn't offering him charity. He was offering him something far more valuable, the truth. And in that truth, Ryan saw a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt something stir inside him. It wasn't a magic solution, nor was it a quick fix, but it was a start. It was the beginning of a journey he had been too afraid to take until now. Ryan looked at Trump, his voice filled with determination. "I'll do it. I'll fight. I'm ready." Trump smiled, a rare, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge Ryan's commitment. "Good. That's the spirit. Now, go out there and show the world what you're made of." As Ryan turned to leave, something inside him had shifted. The fear and doubt that had once consumed him began to fade. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had a chance. A real chance. The crowd dispersed slowly, their curiosity satisfied for the moment, but Ryan was no longer part of the audience. He had become part of the story of a man who had lost everything, only to find the courage to start over. And as he walked away from that moment, with Trump's words ringing in his ears, Ryan knew that the hardest part was over. The real work was just beginning. But what would Ryan do next? What steps would he take to rebuild his life? And would he truly have the strength to face the challenges ahead? Only time would tell. Stay tuned as Ryan begins his journey toward redemption. Ryan walked away from the corner of 42nd Street, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. It wasn't just the physical weight of the backpack on his shoulders or the cold air nipping at his skin. It was the weight of everything he had just committed to. He had chosen to stop asking for handouts. He had chosen to try, to fight. But what did that really mean? The city around him felt the same. Busy, bustling, indifferent. People walked past, heads down, eyes fixed on their phones, each in their own world. But Ryan couldn't help but feel different. He felt like something had shifted inside of him. For the first time in months, he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to live. But as the adrenaline wore off, reality set in. What now? He couldn't just walk back to his old life and expect things to magically change. The life he had built, his career, his family, his home, was gone. There was no easy way back. Ryan found himself at a bench in a nearby park, pulling his coat tightly around him. He sat there for a few moments, gathering his thoughts. He had to think of a plan, a way to rebuild from nothing. The world wasn't going to hand him another chance. He had to create it for himself. But where to start? His mind wandered back to Trump's words. Rebuilding your life isn't about asking for a dollar. It's about taking responsibility and having the courage to face the challenges ahead. Ryan knew this wasn't going to be easy. There was no roadmap for how to rebuild from rock bottom. No one had prepared him for this. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten all day. But as he reached into his pockets for whatever change he had left, his eyes landed on a flyer that had been stuffed into the park bench next to him. It was an advertisement for a job fair. New Beginnings Employment Fair, find your future today. It read in bold letters. Ryan's heart skipped. Could this be it? Was this his first step? His first instinct was to dismiss it. What did he have to offer? He had no resume, no references, nothing. But something in him said he had to at least show up. After all, if he was going to start fighting for his future, he had to begin somewhere. This might be his chance to prove to himself and to the world that he wasn't done yet. Ryan stood up, dusted off his pants, and stuffed the flyer into his coat pocket. He didn't know if he would get hired, or if he would even have the confidence to speak to anyone. But for the first time in months, he had a reason to get moving. The next morning, Ryan stood in front of a large building downtown, feeling the nerves grip his stomach. The job fair was being held inside, and people were streaming in and out. Some of them looked polished and put together, while others looked like they were in the same boat as him, just trying to find something to hold on to. Ryan took a deep breath and walked inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The large room was filled with tables covered with flyers, business cards, and job applications. There were people at every table, filling out forms or talking to recruiters. Ryan stood at the entrance for a moment, his nerves overwhelming him. This was it, his first real attempt to get back into the world he had left behind. He approached one of the tables, where a friendly woman sat, scanning resumes. "Hi, I'm Ryan," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm looking for work." The woman smiled warmly and gestured to a pile of applications. "Well, you've come to the right place, Ryan. Let's see what we can do for you." For the next hour, Ryan filled out applications, asked questions, and talked to recruiters. He felt out of place at first, like he was in over his head, but with each conversation, a small flicker of hope began to grow. These weren't people judging him. They were people offering him opportunities. They didn't see him as the man standing on the corner, asking for change. They saw him as someone who was willing to try. By the time the job fair ended, Ryan had several interviews lined up. He had taken the first step, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had some control over his future. That night, as he sat on the park bench, staring up at the starless sky, Ryan thought about the long road ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He had a long way to go before he could truly rebuild his life. But in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. And maybe, just maybe, he could make it after all. But as Ryan stepped into the unknown, would he be able to overcome the obstacles ahead? And would the interviews lead to something that could truly change his life? The journey had just begun, and there was still so much more to discover. Stay tuned for the next chapter in Ryan's journey. Ryan woke up early the next day, the sharp morning light cutting through the small gap in the curtains of his makeshift shelter. He had spent the night in a corner of a public building, as it was too cold outside to sleep on the streets. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start to something better. The thought of his first interview made his heart race. He hadn't had a real job in over a year. He had spent his time drifting from one day to the next, taking what he could get just to survive. But now, everything had changed. The opportunity was in front of him. It was real. He stood up quickly, brushing the sleep from his eyes, and grabbed the clothes he had cleaned the night before. A wrinkled button-up shirt and a pair of slacks that didn't quite fit him anymore. They were the best he had. His shoes, though scuffed and worn, would have to do. Ryan gave himself a quick look in the cracked mirror by the door, trying to ignore the tired eyes staring back at him. He didn't have much to work with, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Today was the day he had to make it count. He took a deep breath as he headed out, reminding himself that it was just an interview. Nothing to be afraid of. He had prepared the best he could. He could talk. He could show them that he had learned something over the years, that he was ready to give his all. The streets were busy, the morning rush starting to kick in as people hurried along with their coffee cups in hand, ready for the workday. But Ryan felt detached from it all. He felt like an outsider, a stranger in this world that had moved on without him. Still, he pressed forward, reminding himself that he had a goal. The building for his first interview was tall, standing like a fortress of glass and steel. Ryan felt his anxiety rise again. As he walked through the revolving doors, he was greeted by a receptionist who directed him to the waiting area. The room was filled with polished individuals, all in suits and ties, looking like they belonged. And Ryan? He felt like a fish out of water. He sat down, trying to blend in, his hands shaking slightly as he fidgeted with the edge of his shirt. He didn't belong here. He could feel their eyes on him, the polished, confident professionals glancing over at him, probably judging his appearance. They had no idea what he had been through. They had no idea how far he had fallen. As he waited, he thought back to his life before everything fell apart. He had once worn a suit like that, once carried a briefcase and a sense of purpose. He had once believed that success was just a matter of working hard and playing by the rules. But that version of Ryan felt like a stranger now, a distant memory of a life that was out of reach. Ryan Clark? The voice of the receptionist broke his thoughts. Ryan stood up, his legs a little shaky. "That's me." The receptionist smiled and motioned for him to follow. "Your interview is ready. Please follow me." He was led down a hall and into a small conference room where a man in his early 40s was sitting behind a desk. His name was Mark Hamilton, and he had the look of a man who had been in the corporate world for far too long. Sharp suit, neatly combed hair, and the air of someone who didn't have time for distractions. Mark stood up as Ryan entered, extending his hand. "Good to meet you, Ryan," he said with a firm handshake. "Have a seat." Ryan sat down, feeling his palms sweat. He tried to focus on his breathing, to calm his nerves, but the weight of the situation was heavy on him. He had to get this job. He couldn't afford to fail. Mark shuffled through a few papers in front of him before looking Ryan directly in the eye. "So, Ryan, tell me a little about yourself." Ryan paused, trying to find the words. This was the moment that could change everything. He had to explain himself without sounding like a failure, without sounding desperate. But how could he explain the mess of his life? I've had some tough times," Ryan began, his voice low but steady. "I lost everything I had, my job, my family, my home, but I've learned a lot through that process. I'm not proud of the mistakes I've made, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes to turn things around. I'm willing to work hard and prove myself again." Mark listened intently, nodding but saying nothing. Ryan couldn't tell if the man was buying it. He was trying to convey the truth, his desperation to start over, his commitment to never giving up. But was that enough? Was he enough? "Tell me, Ryan," Mark said after a long pause, his voice businesslike, "why should we hire you for this position? What makes you the right person for this job?" Ryan's heart skipped a beat. This was the question that could make or break him. He had no formal qualifications, no resume filled with impressive achievements. But he knew one thing. He had something most of the people in this room didn't have. "I've been through it all," Ryan said, leaning forward slightly. "I know what it's like to be at rock bottom, and I know what it takes to fight your way back up. I may not have all the answers, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else in this room. I don't take anything for granted anymore." Mark was quiet for a moment, considering Ryan's words. Ryan held his breath, hoping that his sincerity was enough. Finally, Mark looked up and nodded. "I appreciate your honesty, Ryan. It's not easy to admit that kind of struggle. Let me be clear, though. This job will be demanding. It's not an easy road, and it's not for everyone. Are you prepared for that?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm ready." Mark studied him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "All right, we'll be in touch, Ryan. Thanks for your time." Ryan stood up, feeling the tension leave his body as he shook Mark's hand once more. He had done it. He had faced his fear and walked into that room, not knowing what the outcome would be. But he had done it, and that, for now, was enough. As Ryan left the building, a sense of pride began to settle in. He had survived his first real test, but he knew this was just the beginning. He still had a long road ahead. Would this job lead to something real? And would Ryan be able to keep up the momentum, facing more interviews and challenges along the way? Only time would tell. Stay tuned for the next chapter in Ryan's journey as he fights to turn his life around. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the interview. He walked the streets in a daze, the events of the morning replaying in his head like a loop. The questions, the way he had answered them, the way Mark had looked at him after he spoke. He had done his best, but would it be enough? The city was moving around him, a blur of noise and motion, but Ryan felt like he was in a world of his own. His stomach was still tight with nerves, but there was also a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good was going to happen. Maybe the long stretch of bad luck was finally about to end. Ryan hadn't realized how much he needed this feeling of possibility. It had been so long since he'd had any real hope. It wasn't just about getting a job anymore. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't done, that he could get back up, no matter how far he'd fallen. He was walking down the street, lost in his thoughts, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another text or maybe a reminder for an upcoming interview. But when he saw the caller ID, his heart stopped. It was Mark Hamilton, the man from the interview. Ryan hesitated for a second, his heart racing. Could this be it? Could he have gotten the job? Hello? Ryan answered, his voice a little shaky. Ryan? Mark's voice came through, steady and professional. It's Mark Hamilton. I'm calling to let you know that after careful consideration, we'd like to offer you the position. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He blinked a few times, trying to process what he was hearing. It felt unreal. You want to hire me? Yes, Mark replied, his voice warm. We think you're a great fit for the role. We understand your situation, and we believe that your determination will be an asset to the team. Congratulations, Ryan. Ryan could hardly believe it. His knees felt weak, and for a moment, he just stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, trying to steady himself. The weight of the past year, of all the failures, of all the disappointments, suddenly lifted off his shoulders. He had done it. He had made it through. I don't even know what to say, Ryan's voice broke, emotion rising in his chest. Thank you. Thank you so much. You've earned it, Mark said kindly. Now, let's go over the details. You'll start next Monday, and we'll send you the paperwork today. How does that sound? Ryan smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. That sounds amazing. They talked for a few more minutes, going over the specifics. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. It was more than he had had in a long time, and more importantly, it was a real chance to rebuild. As soon as the call ended, Ryan stood still for a moment, just letting the enormity of what had just happened sink in. He had done it. After everything, after all the months of struggle and uncertainty, he had found a way out. The future wasn't as bleak as it once seemed. But there was something else, too. A part of him, deep down, knew that getting the job wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. Now, he had to prove himself. He had to show that he could do more than just get by. He had to show that he could thrive. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he had a purpose again. The next few days passed in a blur. Ryan worked on the paperwork for the job, excited but nervous at the same time. He had a place to go, a reason to get up each day, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that this was just one chapter in a much larger story. There were still so many challenges ahead. He used the days leading up to his start to prepare. He cleaned up the small space where he had been staying, trying to make it feel more like a home. He dug through his few belongings, organizing them the best he could. He even bought a second-hand jacket to replace the one that had seen better days. Small things, but they made a difference. They made him feel ready. On Monday morning, he woke up early, more prepared than he had been for anything in a long time. He donned his best clothes, the ones he had borrowed and cleaned, and stood in front of the mirror. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him. He was cleaner, more put together, more confident. But there was still so much work to do. Ryan left his temporary shelter, making his way to the job site. The walk there was different this time. The streets didn't feel as cold or as distant. There was a sense of direction now, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just wandering through life anymore. He had a goal. He had a chance. When Ryan walked into the office building that morning, he could feel the weight of the moment. It was his first day back in the workforce. The first day of a brand new chapter. The people at the front desk were warm, greeting him as though he belonged. And when he walked into the break room, the atmosphere felt like something he could be a part of. A place where people worked hard, but still took the time to talk and laugh. Ryan sat down at his new desk, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore. He was a man with a future. But what would his first day on the job really be like? Would he be able to keep up with the demands? And would the new life he was building last? Or was this just a fleeting moment of success? Stay tuned as Ryan faces his next challenge, surviving his first day on the job. Ryan's heart raced as he stepped off the bus, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. The towering office building in front of him no longer felt as intimidating as it had just a few days ago, but there was still a sense of awe in his chest. This was it, his first day at the job. He couldn't afford to screw it up. He had worked too hard to get here. The lobby of the building was bright and modern, filled with shiny floors and high ceilings. As Ryan walked through the doors, he tried to steady himself, pushing down the nerves that threatened to bubble up. This was his new reality. He had a desk now. He had coworkers. And today, he was going to prove he belonged. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Clark. How are you today?" Ryan's heart skipped a beat. No one had called him Mr. Clark in a long time. It felt almost surreal to hear it. "I'm good, thank you," Ryan replied, forcing a smile. "First day and all." "Well, you're in for a busy day," the receptionist said. "But don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Go ahead and take the elevator to the 4th floor. Your supervisor will be expecting you." Ryan nodded and stepped toward the elevator, taking a deep breath. He could do this. He had to. When the elevator doors opened to the 4th floor, Ryan stepped out and walked down the long hallway to his department. The area was buzzing with activity. People typing away at their desks, answering phones, and talking with coworkers. There was a low hum of productivity in the air, a steady rhythm that made everything feel important. A woman in her early 30s walked over to him, extending her hand. "You must be Ryan. I'm Emma. I'll be your supervisor for the day. Welcome to the team." Ryan shook her hand, feeling a little out of place but trying his best to hide it. "Thanks for having me." Emma smiled and motioned toward his desk. "This is where you'll be sitting. We'll get you set up with your computer and everything, and then I'll walk you through the first tasks of the day." Ryan took a seat at the desk, looking around the room. His coworkers were already deep in their work, and the quiet murmur of conversations filled the space. It wasn't as intimidating as he had expected, but the pressure was still there. He had no idea how long he would be able to keep up with the pace. For the next few hours, Ryan was on his feet, moving between tasks, answering calls, entering data into the computer, and handling various administrative duties. It wasn't complicated work, but it was fast-paced, and it required a level of focus that Ryan hadn't had to maintain in a long time. At first, he stumbled a bit. He was slower than the others, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard, his mind racing to keep up with the tasks at hand. But slowly, he found his rhythm. He remembered how it felt to work efficiently, to focus on the job at hand. It felt good, in a way that he hadn't experienced in so long. But there were moments, too, when doubt crept in. He couldn't help but notice the polished professionalism of his coworkers. They were so smooth in their movements, so confident in their work. And Ryan? He felt like an imposter, like at any moment someone would realize that he didn't belong here. During lunch, Ryan sat alone at his desk, quietly eating his sandwich. He had always been the type of person who kept to himself, but today the loneliness felt sharper. His coworkers seemed to know each other so well. They chatted effortlessly, shared laughs, and worked together seamlessly. Ryan wasn't part of that. Not yet. As he chewed, he thought back to his old life, the life he had before everything fell apart, before the job loss, before the homelessness. He had been someone different back then. He had been someone confident, someone who could walk into a room and command attention. But now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. Who was this person sitting at a desk, trying to fit in, trying to catch up? It felt like the old Ryan was a distant memory. "Hey, Ryan, how's your first day going?" Ryan looked up to see Emma standing at the edge of his desk, a concerned expression on her face. He forced a smile. "It's good. Busy, but good." She nodded, looking around the office for a moment before returning her gaze to him. "I know it's a lot to take in, but you're doing great. Just take it one step at a time, okay?" Ryan nodded, grateful for her encouragement. "Thanks, Emma. I appreciate it." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of tasks, phone calls, and trying to keep up with the relentless pace. As the hours passed, Ryan began to settle into a routine. The nervousness that had gripped him in the morning faded, replaced by a quiet determination to prove himself. By the end of the day, Ryan was exhausted. His mind was buzzing with information, and his body ached from the constant movement. He had gotten through it, though. He had made it through his first day, and despite the challenges, he felt a glimmer of pride in himself. As he packed up his things and prepared to leave, he realized something. He wasn't just doing this for the job. He wasn't just doing this for the paycheck. He was doing this for himself, for the man he used to be, and for the man he was becoming. As he walked out of the building and into the evening air, Ryan couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. He had faced the fear, and he had made it through. But this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to do, still so much to prove. Would he be able to maintain this momentum? Would he keep up with the demands of the job, or would the weight of his past catch up with him? Stay tuned to see if Ryan can keep pushing forward day after day, or if his past will come back to haunt him. Ryan woke up to the sound of his alarm blaring, the familiar rush of anxiety that came with starting a new day. But today, it was different. His first day at work had been a success, and he couldn't help but feel a spark of confidence. The second day was the real test. He had proven that he could make it through one day, but could he keep up with the pace? He got out of bed, quickly got dressed, and ate a simple breakfast. His new routine had started to feel normal, but there was still a lingering nervousness. What would happen when the work got harder? Would he be able to rise to the challenge? As he walked out of the small apartment, the cold morning air hit him. But instead of making him feel small and defeated, it energized him. This was his chance to prove to himself that he could handle whatever came his way. The bus ride was short, and as he stepped off, the same towering office building loomed before him. The weight of the previous day's success was still fresh, but Ryan knew better than to get complacent. The hardest part of all this wasn't just getting a job, it was keeping it. And he was determined to make it work. When he arrived at the office, he was greeted by the usual smiles from the receptionist and Emma, his supervisor, who waved him over to her desk. "Good morning, Ryan," she said brightly. "How are you feeling today?" Ryan managed to smile, though his nerves were bubbling up again. "Good, just ready to get to work." "Great," Emma said, handing him a set of documents. "Today's going to be a bit busier than yesterday. We have a few more projects lined up, and I'll be assigning you some tasks. We're all working to meet a deadline this week, so it's going to be a lot of pressure. But I know you can handle it." Ryan took the papers from her, nodding. He could handle it. He had to. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Ryan was swamped with phone calls, emails, and the growing pile of paperwork that seemed to multiply by the minute. His mind raced as he tried to stay on top of everything, but he was starting to feel the pressure. He wasn't just learning the ropes anymore. He was expected to deliver and deliver fast. By lunchtime, Ryan was already mentally exhausted. He had made a few mistakes, small ones, but still noticeable. One phone call had gotten lost in the shuffle, and he had accidentally forwarded an email to the wrong person. It wasn't a disaster, but it still felt like a failure. He found a quiet spot in the break room and sat alone, staring at his half-eaten sandwich. His mind kept replaying his mistakes. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe this job was too much for him. He could hear the voices of his coworkers in the background, laughter, casual conversations, and the constant hum of productivity. But Ryan felt detached from it all. He wasn't a part of their world. He was the new guy, the outsider, trying to catch up. "Hey, Ryan, you okay?" Ryan looked up to see Emma standing at the door, a concerned look on her face. "Yeah, just tired," he admitted, offering a weak smile. "I guess I'm just not used to this kind of pace." Emma walked over and sat across from him. "I get it. It can be overwhelming at first, but you're doing well. You've only been here 2 days, and already you're picking things up. It takes time." Ryan hesitated. "I'm just worried I'm not good enough, that I'm going to mess up and they'll realize I don't belong here." Emma's expression softened. "Listen to me, Ryan. Everyone has doubts, even the people who seem like they've got it all together. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is whether they keep pushing forward when things get tough. You're here for a reason. We wouldn't have hired you if we didn't believe in you." Ryan looked at her, her words sinking in. He hadn't expected this kind of support, not so soon. For the first time, he realized that maybe he wasn't just an outsider to this office. Maybe he was starting to be a part of it. "Thanks, Emma," Ryan said quietly. "I needed to hear that." "Anytime," Emma replied with a smile. "Now, let's get back to work. We've got a lot to do, and I know you can handle it." As they returned to their desks, Ryan's mind shifted. He wasn't going to let a few mistakes derail him. He had to keep going. He had to push past the fear and self-doubt. The afternoon was just as challenging as the morning. The work piled on, deadlines approached, and the pressure mounted. Ryan's hands trembled as he typed, but he focused, one task at a time. He couldn't afford to rush. By the time the clock struck 5, Ryan was exhausted but proud. He had made it through the day without any major issues. Sure, there had been moments of doubt, but he had persevered. He was still here. He was still fighting. As he walked out of the building at the end of his second day, Ryan's thoughts turned to the future. He had made it through 2 days. What about tomorrow? The day after? But then, a small smile spread across his face. He didn't need to know everything. He didn't need to have it all figured out. What mattered was that he kept going, one day at a time. He was no longer just the homeless man asking for $1. He was Ryan Clark, a man who had a chance to rebuild his life. And that was worth fighting for. Would Ryan continue to overcome the challenges ahead? Or would the pressure prove too much? Stay tuned as Ryan faces his biggest test yet, proving that he can truly belong in this new life. Ryan's alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., a shrill reminder that another day awaited him. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with everything that could go wrong. He hadn't expected this to be easy, but the constant pressure to keep up was starting to feel like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. As he stumbled out of bed and splashed water on his face, he reminded himself that he couldn't afford to let fear dictate his actions. Today was his 3rd day at the office. He had already survived 2 days. He could handle today. He had to. The walk to the bus stop felt longer today. Each step seemed to carry more weight, and Ryan couldn't help but wonder if he was truly ready for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. His first day had been about survival, getting through it. The second day had been about proving to himself that he could do it. But today felt different. There was something about the way his co-workers moved with such confidence that made Ryan feel small. He still didn't quite belong. When he arrived at the office, the familiar sight of the building didn't comfort him as much as it had before. He still felt like an outsider, a man playing a role he wasn't sure he was capable of pulling off. As he entered the lobby, the receptionist greeted him, but Ryan barely registered her words. His mind was elsewhere, replaying his self-doubt over and over again. Was he doing enough? Was he doing it right? He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor. As the doors closed, he glanced at his reflection in the shiny metal surface. The man staring back at him didn't look like someone who had just gotten a new job. He looked tired, uncertain, like someone who was trying to hold everything together but was close to falling apart. When the elevator doors opened, Emma was waiting for him. She had a warm smile, but today it seemed different, more professional than friendly. "Good morning, Ryan," she said. "I have a few tasks for you today that I think you'll find challenging, but I know you're up to it." Ryan nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm ready." "Great," she said. "We've got a client presentation in the afternoon, and I'll need you to prepare some reports and organize the slides. It's a big deal, so I'll need everything to be perfect." Ryan's stomach tightened. He hadn't been expecting something this high-stakes so soon. He had no idea how to prepare a presentation, let alone one for a client. But he couldn't show his fear. "Not now." "Got it," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the churn in his gut. The morning passed quickly as Ryan dove into the task. He worked in silence, trying to keep his mind focused. He could feel the weight of Emma's expectations on him, and the looming presentation in the afternoon was a constant pressure at the back of his mind. It wasn't long before he hit his first roadblock. The reports he was working on didn't make sense, and he couldn't figure out why the numbers weren't adding up. The clock was ticking, and Emma was checking in every now and then, offering brief encouragement, but also giving off the sense that this was no time for mistakes. Ryan's frustration grew. The last thing he wanted was to disappoint her, or worse, mess up the presentation. He tried to stay calm, but each mistake made the task feel more insurmountable. Ryan, do you need help with something? Emma asked, walking over to his desk. Her tone was kind, but there was an edge of urgency to it. Ryan froze, his mind racing. He didn't want to admit that he was struggling. That would show weakness, wouldn't it? He had to figure this out on his own. But the pressure was mounting, and he could feel the walls closing in. I think I've got it. Just give me a few more minutes. Emma seemed to sense the tension in his voice, and her expression softened. You're doing great, Ryan. But remember, it's okay to ask for help when you need it. We're a team here. Ryan looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't weakness to ask for help, it was smart. Actually, Ryan said, his voice quieter now, I could use a hand with this. The numbers aren't lining up the way I thought they would. Emma smiled, her demeanor softening. No problem. Let's take a look together. For the next hour, Emma guided Ryan through the issue, showing him how to correct the errors in the report and organize the data in a way that made sense. Ryan felt a sense of relief as the pieces finally clicked into place. It wasn't as complicated as he had made it out to be. It just required a little patience and a second set of eyes. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Ryan was feeling more confident. The presentation slides were ready, the reports were polished, and everything was in order. Emma had given him some final pointers, but Ryan had done most of the work on his own. As the client arrived, Ryan stood by the door, trying to keep his nerves under control. This was it, the moment when everything could either come together or fall apart. He could hear Emma's voice in the other room, welcoming the clients in, and his heart raced. He had done his part. He had contributed to this moment, and now all he had to do was hold it together. He took a deep breath and walked into the meeting room. His co-workers were already seated, and the clients were settled at the table, flipping through the materials. Ryan stood at the back, trying to look confident, though his hands were trembling. Emma noticed him standing there and gave him an encouraging nod. She trusted him. He had to trust himself too. As the meeting began, Ryan followed the presentation carefully, watching as Emma spoke with authority, guiding the clients through the slides. His reports had been a key part of the presentation, and he could see the clients nodding and taking notes. The pressure was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been earlier. When the meeting ended, Emma gave him a quick thumbs up as everyone began to filter out. Ryan couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. He had done it. That night, as he walked home, Ryan's mind was still buzzing with the day's events. He had faced the weight of expectations, and for the first time in a long time, he had risen to meet them. The future wasn't guaranteed, and there would be more challenges ahead, but for now, he had proven to himself that he could do this. Maybe, just maybe, he belonged here after all. Would Ryan's growing confidence carry him through the next wave of challenges? Or would the fear of failure be his undoing? Stay tuned to see what happens next as Ryan navigates the ups and downs of this new life he's building. The days seemed to blur together as Ryan settled deeper into his routine at work. He had faced challenges, pushed through his doubts, and found a rhythm that made the constant pressure feel just a little more manageable. But even as his confidence grew, a new tension began to creep in. Something that he hadn't anticipated, the cost of success. Every day, he found himself working longer hours. There was always more to do, more to prove. What started as a job to get back on his feet had become a race against time. Ryan was no longer just trying to keep his job. Now, he was trying to excel at it. He wanted to prove to everyone, including himself, that he was worth the opportunity. It was a Friday afternoon when Emma dropped a new task on him. Ryan, I need this report by Monday, she said, handing him a thick stack of documents. It's a big one, and we're up against a tight deadline. I know you can handle it. Ryan nodded, his stomach churning. He had barely any time to relax over the weekend, and yet, another mountain of work awaited him. The weight of responsibility was beginning to feel overwhelming, but he couldn't say no. Not now. Not after everything he had worked for. I'll get it done, he promised, though the words barely left his lips with any conviction. As he sat down at his desk, the pile of work before him seemed insurmountable. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic clack of keyboards and the occasional phone ringing in the distance. Ryan's focus was intense, but there was a gnawing feeling deep inside him that he couldn't ignore. The more he worked, the more he realized something important. The harder he worked, the more he pushed away his life outside of work. He hadn't seen his friends in weeks. He barely had time to call his mom, and the brief moments of peace he used to cherish were now swallowed by deadlines. Every free second felt like an opportunity to work harder, to prove that he deserved to be here. He shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. There was no time to think about that now. He had a report to finish. The hours passed quickly as Ryan powered through the paperwork. His mind moved from one task to the next, each decision feeling weightier than the last. By the time he stood up to stretch, it was nearly 9 p.m. His eyes were blurry from staring at the screen, and his back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. But there was no stopping now. As he prepared to grab a quick dinner from a nearby convenience store, he spotted Emma walking through the office, her own pace hurried. She paused for a moment when she saw him. "Hey, Ryan, you still working on that report?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Yeah, just about done," Ryan replied, forcing a smile. "It's just taking longer than I thought." "Don't overdo it," she said, giving him a knowing look. "Remember, we want quality over quantity. It's okay to take a break now and then." Ryan nodded, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't about the quality. It was about showing that he could handle more than anyone else. He had to prove that he could succeed, even when it felt impossible. As the weekend came and went, Ryan barely noticed the passing of time. His world had shrunk to the walls of his office and the pile of work in front of him. He stopped taking breaks, stopped thinking about his social life. His friends' text messages piled up, unanswered, and his family's calls went to voicemail. All that mattered was the report, the deadlines, and keeping up with the expectations that seemed to grow every day. By Monday morning, he had finished the report, barely. The pages were printed and organized, but Ryan could feel the toll it had taken on him. His body ached, his eyes were heavy, and his mind felt like it was on the verge of a breakdown. As he handed the report to Emma, she smiled and thanked him, but Ryan could barely muster the energy to smile back. He had delivered, but at what cost? The following days passed in a blur. The office felt like a pressure cooker, and Ryan's anxiety kept building. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was falling into a trap, one that he had set for himself. Work had become his entire life. His success had come at the expense of his personal life, his health, and his happiness. He wasn't sure how to stop, but he knew something had to change. One evening, as he sat in his small apartment, eating takeout in front of the TV, Ryan realized he hadn't left his desk in days. He hadn't spoken to anyone outside of work. The people he used to call friends felt like strangers. He had no idea what he was doing anymore. He was working for the sake of working, but for what? As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in his facade began to show. He started making small mistakes at work, missing details in reports, getting dates wrong, and forgetting tasks. He was running on empty, and the stress was starting to catch up with him. On Thursday afternoon, Ryan walked into the office feeling more drained than ever. As he passed by Emma's desk, she stopped him with a concerned expression. "Ryan, you okay?" she asked. "You look a little off today." Ryan froze, his heart racing. He hadn't realized how much his exhaustion was showing. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired," he said, trying to play it off. Emma didn't seem convinced. "You've been pushing yourself really hard lately. Maybe it's time to take a step back and recharge." Ryan nodded, but the words didn't sink in. He wasn't sure what it meant to take a step back. He had no idea how to slow down. His whole identity now felt tied to this job, to this new life. He had worked so hard to get here, and yet, he was beginning to wonder if he was losing himself in the process. That night, Ryan sat in his apartment again, staring out the window. He had made it so far, but at what cost? He had a job, he was surviving, but at the expense of his health, his relationships, and his peace of mind. For the first time, Ryan allowed himself to question everything. Was this really the life he wanted? Was success worth the price he was paying? Would Ryan find a way to reclaim balance in his life, or would the relentless pursuit of success be his undoing? Stay tuned as Ryan faces the hardest decision of all, choosing between his ambition and his well-being. Ryan had barely slept the night before. His mind buzzed with thoughts, the heavy weight of his decisions swirling around him like a storm he couldn't escape. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, constantly pushing himself until he was drained, unable to focus on anything but the next task. But he couldn't stop either. Not now. Not after everything he had sacrificed to get here. It was another early morning when he arrived at the office, still exhausted but determined to push through. The fluorescent lights hummed above him as he walked into the lobby, his thoughts clouded. Emma had noticed his exhaustion yesterday, and the concern in her eyes had stayed with him. She had asked him if he was okay. Was he okay? Ryan stopped in front of the elevator, staring at his reflection in the shiny metal doors. He barely recognized the person looking back at him. His face was thinner, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. He looked tired. But more than that, he looked lost. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside, pushing the button for the 4th floor. As the elevator hummed its way up, Ryan found himself questioning his choices once again. What was he really chasing? Was it success? Validation? Or was it something else entirely? The elevator dinged, and the doors opened, pulling him out of his thoughts. He walked into the office, the familiar hum of activity around him. His coworkers were already busy, their faces a blur of concentration as they typed away at their desks. Ryan sat down at his workstation, staring at the pile of papers in front of him. The usual sense of urgency flooded his chest. There was so much to do, so many expectations to meet, and yet, his body felt like it was running on empty. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind wandered back to Emma's words. Maybe it's time to take a step back, she had said. The idea lingered in his mind, like a small seed that had been planted, but he pushed it aside. He didn't have the luxury to step back, not when he was this close to proving himself. As the day dragged on, Ryan felt the weight of exhaustion pressing against him, his focus slipping. He was too tired to make the right decisions, too worn out to catch the small mistakes he had once been able to spot with ease. The pressure was building, and he could feel it, tightening around his chest, making it harder to breathe. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, disaster struck. Ryan had been reviewing a report, double-checking numbers when his phone buzzed with a new email. It was from one of the clients. He opened it, only to see a list of corrections that needed to be made to a presentation he had worked on for the past few days. The client had noticed several mistakes in the data, things Ryan hadn't caught. His heart sank. This was it. This was the moment when everything could fall apart. The pressure to fix everything felt unbearable, and as he reread the email for the 3rd time, his hands started to shake. The last thing he wanted to do was disappoint anyone, especially Emma. But he had made a mistake, and now it was all falling apart. Panic rose in his chest, and he stood up from his desk, pacing around the office. He tried to breathe deeply, but his chest tightened. He needed to fix it. He had to fix it. There was no other choice. As he rushed to the meeting room to grab the updated files, he felt his phone buzz again. This time, it was a text from his mother. "Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" Ryan stared at the message for a long moment, his heart aching. He had been so consumed with work that he hadn't called her in weeks. He hadn't called anyone. He had become a stranger to the people who cared about him. And now, here he was, standing on the edge of a breakdown, unable to focus on anything but the work in front of him. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. What had he become? A few minutes later, he returned to his desk, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He needed to fix the errors, get everything right, and make sure the client was satisfied. But he also needed to find a way to fix himself. He couldn't keep going like this. Ryan started to work on the revisions, but the words blurred together. He was exhausted, his mind struggling to stay sharp. It felt like he was going through the motions, but nothing was clicking. That's when Emma walked by, pausing when she saw the look on his face. "Ryan, you okay?" she asked again, her voice soft. He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just a little stressed with this report." Emma didn't buy it. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing through the facade he had built. "Ryan, I'm not going to let you work yourself to the bone. You need to take a break. We can handle this." I'm fine, Ryan insisted, his voice shaky. No, you're not, Emma said, her voice firm now. You're overworking yourself, and it's showing. You don't have to do this alone. Ryan's heart raced. He wanted to protest, to keep working, to prove that he could handle everything, but something inside him cracked. His eyes filled with frustration and exhaustion. I don't know how to stop, he whispered, more to himself than to Emma. Emma's expression softened. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You don't have to be perfect. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to rest. Ryan closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling over him like a blanket. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. But the question remained. Could he really let go of the need to prove himself? Why don't you go home for the night? Emma suggested. Get some rest. We'll take care of this. Ryan hesitated. It felt impossible to walk away, to leave the work unfinished. But as Emma stood there, waiting for him to make a decision, he realized something important. There was more to life than work. There was more to him than the job he had built his identity around. Maybe it was time to stop running. Ryan looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to nod. Okay, he said, his voice quiet. I'll go home. The decision felt like the hardest thing he had ever done, but as he grabbed his coat and walked toward the exit, he realized something else too. Maybe the first step to truly succeeding wasn't about working harder, but about learning when to take a step back. As he left the office, Ryan knew he was at a crossroads. He had a choice to make. Whether to continue down this path of self-destruction or to finally listen to the part of him that wanted balance, peace, and the chance to live a life beyond the confines of the office. Would Ryan choose the harder road of perfection, or would he embrace the possibility of a healthier, more balanced life? Stay tuned to see how Ryan's decision will shape his future and whether he can rebuild his life on his own terms. The cold air hit Ryan as he stepped outside the building, the city's evening lights flickering in the distance. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind, but the weight of everything, his job, his future, the choices he had made, still loomed over him. Walking down the sidewalk, Ryan couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right decision. Was stepping away from the office the answer? Or was he simply running away from the hard work he had fought so desperately for? As he turned the corner, his phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out, and his heart skipped when he saw it was a message from his mom. I'm glad you're taking some time for yourself. Remember, you're never alone, no matter how far away we are. A lump formed in his throat. Ryan hadn't realized how much he missed her. It had been weeks since they'd spoken properly. His mind had been so focused on proving himself that he had forgotten the very people who had supported him all along. He took a moment to compose himself before typing a response. Thanks, Mom. I think I needed to hear that. I'm going to try and figure things out. As he hit send, he felt a small weight lift off his chest. He wasn't sure where he was going, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel the constant pressure. He didn't go straight home that evening. Instead, he took a long walk through the city, letting his mind wander, letting himself breathe. It was as if he was reconnecting with a part of himself he had lost somewhere along the way. The part of him that still had a sense of wonder, of possibility. Ryan found himself standing at the edge of a small park, the lights of the city reflecting off the puddles on the ground. There was something oddly peaceful about the quiet, despite the bustling city around him. He sat down on a bench and gazed at the horizon, allowing himself to let go of the incessant thoughts that had plagued him for so long. A few minutes passed before his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Emma. I'm glad you're taking the night off. Just wanted to check in and say, don't overthink things. You're doing great, Ryan. And we've got this under control. Ryan smiled softly as he read her words. He had never really given Emma enough credit. She wasn't just his boss. She was someone who genuinely cared. He typed back, Thanks, Emma. I really needed that. But even as he typed the message, Ryan couldn't help but feel the tug of doubt creeping back in. How long could he really stay away from the office? How long before the weight of expectations pulled him back in, demanding more of him? Just as he was about to get up and head home, his phone rang again. This time, it was a call from his friend, Mark, someone he hadn't talked to in weeks. Mark had been there for him during some of his toughest moments, and Ryan realized he hadn't even bothered to reach out to him in recent days. "Hey, man," Ryan answered, his voice sounding surprisingly relieved to hear Mark's familiar tone. "Hey, Ryan," Mark replied with a warm laugh. "It's been forever. How's everything going?" Ryan took a deep breath before answering. "It's been a lot. I've been working nonstop, but today, I decided to take a break." "Sounds like a good call," Mark said. "You've been burning the candle at both ends. You need to take care of yourself, man. I've been trying to tell you that for months." Ryan chuckled, the tension in his body easing just a little. I know. I've just been pushing, trying to prove I can do it all." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to yourself," Mark said, his voice steady and comforting. "Remember, we're all in this together. No one expects you to be perfect." Ryan leaned back against the bench, looking up at the stars. His friend's words hit deeper than he expected. It was true. He had been so focused on perfection, on this idea of success, that he had forgotten the value of simply being present, of being himself. "I'm glad you called," Ryan said quietly. "I've kind of lost touch with everything lately. I didn't even realize it until today." "Yeah, I figured," Mark replied with a smile in his voice. "You know, if you need a break, we could hang out this weekend. I'll take you out for a drink, help you unwind. You deserve it." Ryan smiled, the offer feeling like a lifeline. "I think I'd like that. It's been too long." "Good, it's settled then," Mark said. "Now go home, get some rest, and we'll catch up soon." After hanging up, Ryan sat there for a while longer, letting the stillness of the night settle into his bones. It wasn't just the rest he needed, it was a shift in how he saw himself, in how he approached life. For too long, Ryan had allowed his identity to be defined by the grind, by his job, by the pressure to succeed. But the truth was, there was more to life than just work. There were friends who cared about him, a family that loved him, moments of peace and joy that he had been missing out on. It was time to stop running, time to start living. Ryan stood up, his steps more purposeful now. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that, despite everything he had gone through, he could build a life that was not just about success, but about balance, about happiness, about connection. As he walked home that evening, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. He didn't have it all figured out yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone in this anymore. And that, for now, was enough. What would Ryan's next steps look like? Would he be able to find a new balance in his life? Or would the pressures of success pull him back into the cycle he'd fought so hard to escape? Stay tuned for the next chapter in Ryan's journey, where new challenges await, and a new way forward may finally emerge. Ryan woke up the next morning feeling a sense of calm that had eluded him for months. The sun was shining through the window, casting a warm glow across his apartment. He stretched, the stiff muscles in his shoulders and back protesting from the tension that had built up over time. But as he sat up on the edge of the bed, he felt something different, a sense of freedom. The decision to step away from the office had been a small but significant victory. It wasn't just about taking a day off. It was about choosing himself over the never-ending demands of his job. But now, the question remained. What came next? Ryan walked into the kitchen, starting the coffee pot and letting the familiar morning ritual help clear his mind. As the aroma of brewing coffee filled the apartment, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it. His boss, Emma, had sent him a message. "Hope you got some rest last night. Just checking in. Take your time today, but let me know if you need anything. You're doing great." He smiled at the message. It was a small gesture, but it made him realize how much Emma's support had meant. She hadn't pressured him to return to the office immediately. Instead, she had given him the space to breathe, something he had never expected from a high-pressure workplace like theirs. After reading the message, Ryan sat down at the kitchen table with his coffee and thought about the road ahead. He didn't want to just go back to the way things were. The old routine had been draining, a never-ending cycle of work and stress. But what else could he do? What did he want out of life? Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to focus. He could hear Mark's voice from their phone call the night before. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to yourself." It was a simple thought, but it struck him deeply. He didn't have to prove himself. He had spent so much time trying to earn the approval of others, his boss, his clients, his family, that he had forgotten the most important approval he needed was his own. Ryan stood up from the table, feeling more resolved than he had in a long time. He wasn't sure where the journey would take him, but he knew he couldn't go back to living the way he had. That afternoon, instead of heading straight back to the office, Ryan decided to meet Mark. They hadn't hung out in a while, and Ryan needed the support of a friend more than he realized. Mark was waiting for him outside a local bar when Ryan arrived, his face lighting up as he spotted him. "Ryan, finally, man. I've missed you," Mark said, pulling him into a hug. Ryan laughed, feeling a warmth spread through him. "It's good to see you, Mark. I'm glad we're finally doing this." They sat down at a corner booth, and Mark immediately ordered a round of drinks. Ryan hesitated, unsure about whether he should indulge, but then figured he could allow himself a break, a small indulgence. It was time to enjoy life without the constant pressure of overthinking every move he made. "So, what's been going on with you?" Mark asked, leaning in. "How's work? Everything good?" Ryan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift a little as he spoke. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been pushing myself too hard, trying to keep up with everything, but it's been taking its toll. I don't know if I can keep up this pace." Mark nodded, his expression understanding. "That's tough, man. I can see how hard you've been working, but you've got to know when to step back. Life's too short to be caught up in that grind forever." Ryan leaned back, staring at the drink in front of him. "I know. I guess I've just been so focused on proving I can do it all, but I'm starting to wonder if it's even worth it. I don't know where I'm heading anymore. I'm trying to figure it out." "You're not alone in feeling that way," Mark said, offering a reassuring smile. "Stay tuned to find out." The next few days were a whirlwind of contemplation for Ryan. Each morning, as he sipped his coffee, he would reflect on his past decisions, trying to piece together what had gone wrong and what he could do differently. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted, and now he could finally breathe. But breathing wasn't enough. He needed purpose, something to guide him through the uncertainty that had settled in his life. One afternoon, Ryan decided to take a walk through the park, something he hadn't done in years. The simple act of walking without a destination felt like a form of rebellion against his former, rigid schedule. He needed space, he needed air, and most of all, he needed time to figure out what came next. The park was peaceful, filled with families enjoying the crisp fall air, kids running around, and joggers passing by with determined expressions. As he walked, his thoughts drifted to his career. The world of business, the constant grind, the endless projects, it all seemed so distant now. Ryan had always been driven by success, but what did that even mean anymore? Was it really worth it? And if not, what other paths were available? While lost in his thoughts, Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a message from Emma. "Hey, Ryan. Just wanted to touch base. We've been talking about some new projects, and I think you'd be a great fit for one of them. No pressure, but let me know if you're open to chatting." Smiley face. Ryan stared at the screen for a moment. The idea of diving back into work was tempting, especially with something new. But after everything that had happened, was he really ready to go back to the office? He wasn't sure, but the mention of a new project intrigued him. Maybe it wasn't about going back to the same grind, but rather finding something that truly sparked his interest. He typed a quick response, "Thanks, Emma. I'm open to chatting. Let me know when would be a good time." As soon as he sent the message, a wave of unease washed over him. Was this the right move? What if it pulled him back into the same cycle of stress? Ryan stood there for a moment, looking out at the pond in the park, the water calm and still, much like the sense of peace he was craving in his own life. Within the hour, Emma responded, suggesting they meet at a nearby cafe to discuss the project. Ryan agreed, telling himself that it would be good to reconnect with his work, but with no intention of diving headfirst back into the pressure that had once consumed him. The cafe was cozy and filled with the aroma of fresh pastries and brewed coffee. Ryan arrived early, unsure of what to expect, but feeling a slight sense of excitement mixed with nervousness. He'd been away from the office for a few days now, and though it felt good to take a step back, The familiar comfort of a well-known environment, his job, pulled at him. Emma greeted him with a warm smile as she approached the table. She was dressed casually, a far cry from the power suits she usually wore in the office, which made Ryan feel a little more at ease. They exchanged pleasantries before sitting down, and Emma wasted no time diving into the topic. "So, Ryan," Emma started, "I've been thinking about you a lot over the past week. I know you've been taking some time to reflect, and I really respect that. We've got a new project coming up, something a bit different from what we've done before. I think you'd be the perfect fit." Ryan raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What kind of project is it?" Emma leaned in slightly, her tone excited. "It's a nonprofit initiative. We're looking to partner with a few organizations that help the homeless and provide support for them to re-enter the workforce. It's going to be a big shift for the company, but it's the kind of work that could make a real difference in people's lives." Ryan's mind immediately went to the homeless man he had encountered just a few weeks ago. The man's request for $1 had stuck with him in a way he hadn't expected. The encounter had forced Ryan to reflect on his own life, and in a way, it had inspired his decision to take a break and reevaluate his priorities. Now, hearing about a project aimed at helping the very people who had opened his eyes, he felt a sense of connection. "That sounds amazing," Ryan said, his voice soft with genuine interest. "But I have to ask, what's the goal? What kind of role would I be playing?" Emma smiled warmly, sensing Ryan's hesitation. "I'm glad to hear you're interested. The project is still in its early stages, but we need someone who can help with the strategic planning and partnerships. The idea is to bring in companies, local businesses, and even other nonprofits to create a sustainable model that can really make a difference." Ryan thought about it for a moment. It sounded like a lot of responsibility, but it was different. So different from anything he'd done before. It felt meaningful. More importantly, it felt like it might be the kind of work that would align with the values he had been searching for. "I'm in," Ryan said, his voice firm with a sense of certainty he hadn't felt in a long time. "This sounds like something I'd love to be a part of." Emma beamed at his response. "I'm so glad to hear that. We've been trying to find the right person, and I really believe you're the one for this." They spent the next hour discussing the project in detail, and Ryan felt a growing sense of excitement. He wasn't just stepping back into his old role, he was stepping into something new, something that could make a real impact. The weight of his previous doubts and fears started to lift as he saw this project not just as a job, but as a new beginning. As the meeting wrapped up, Emma stood to leave. "I'm really excited for you, Ryan. We'll send over the official details, but I think you're going to do great things with this." Ryan shook her hand, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. As he left the cafe, he realized that he wasn't just taking a new step in his career. He was finding a new sense of purpose. The opportunity was exactly what he had been searching for. A way to make a difference, to give back, and to find fulfillment in something bigger than himself. As Ryan walked home that evening, his mind raced with ideas. He had always wanted to make an impact, but the corporate world had never felt like the place to do it. Now, he had a chance to do something that mattered. Something that could change lives, not just his own, but the lives of others who needed it most. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt certain about one thing. This was the road less traveled, but it was the one he was meant to be on. What new challenges would Ryan face as he embarked on this path? Could he find the balance between his career and the meaningful work he was now committed to? Stay tuned to find out how Ryan's journey continues. Ryan spent the following week immersed in his new project. The nonprofit initiative to help the homeless reintegrate into the workforce was unlike anything he had ever done before. There were no tight deadlines pushing him into constant stress. Instead, there was a quiet but powerful energy surrounding the project. He could feel the purpose behind it. This wasn't just about the bottom line, profit margins, or networking for the sake of business. It was about giving people a second chance. Despite his enthusiasm, Ryan still felt a sense of unease. This was uncharted territory for him, and though he was passionate about the cause, he didn't want to mess it up. He had been in the corporate world for so long that stepping into a nonprofit initiative felt like a giant leap. But this time, there was no pressure to prove himself. Emma's faith in him was reassuring, but the project required him to navigate unfamiliar waters. One day, As he was reviewing some documents in his apartment, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. "Hey, Ryan. I'd like you to meet someone who could be a great help with the project. His name is Jack. He's been working in nonprofit management for years and has a lot of experience with this kind of work. I think you'll really benefit from his insight. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow. Let me know if you're free." Ryan quickly typed back, "Sounds great. I'm free tomorrow afternoon." The next day, Ryan arrived at a small, local coffee shop where Emma had arranged the meeting. He felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He was about to meet Jack, a man who, by all accounts, had more experience in nonprofit work than Ryan could even fathom. As he walked through the door, he spotted a man sitting at a corner table, his back to the door, dressed casually in a flannel shirt and jeans. Ryan approached cautiously, and the man turned around, offering a friendly smile. "Ryan?" the man asked. "Yeah, that's me. You must be Jack." Jack nodded. "I am. It's good to meet you. Emma's said a lot of good things about you." They shook hands, and Jack motioned for Ryan to sit down. As they got comfortable, Jack wasted no time in diving into the conversation. "So, Emma told me you're new to the nonprofit scene. How's everything going so far?" Ryan chuckled nervously. "It's different for sure. I've spent most of my career in the corporate world, so this is a big shift for me. But I'm excited. I really believe in what we're trying to do here. It just feels a bit overwhelming at times." Jack smiled knowingly. "I get that. Transitioning from the corporate world to nonprofit work can be a shock. But here's the thing. You're not trying to make the same kind of impact that a corporation would. It's not about profits or scaling. It's about lives. The key to this work is connection. It's about finding the people who need help and giving them the support they need, not just the resources they think they need." Ryan nodded, taking in Jack's words. There was something about the way Jack spoke, so calm, so grounded, that made Ryan feel like he had a lot to learn. Jack's experience was evident, but it wasn't just his knowledge that resonated. It was the depth of his commitment to the cause. "You're right," Ryan said. "I think I've been so focused on the logistics of the project that I've forgotten about the people we're trying to help." Jack leaned in, his eyes sharp but kind. "That's a common mistake. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the schedules, the partnerships. But at the end of the day, the reason we do this work is because of the people. And if you're going to make a real difference, you have to connect with them. You have to listen, understand where they're coming from, and build a system that gives them the tools they need to stand on their own feet." Ryan thought about this for a moment, and it felt like a weight lifted off his shoulders. Here was Jack, a seasoned mentor, teaching him not just about the mechanics of nonprofit work, but about the deeper purpose of it all. It was the first time in a long while that Ryan felt like he was learning something that would truly make a difference, not just to his career but to the world around him. They spent the next couple of hours talking about the logistics of the project, partnerships with local businesses, training programs for homeless individuals, and sustainable funding. But there was a deep connection between their ideas, and as Jack continued to share his wisdom, Ryan felt a shift within himself. He wasn't just part of a project anymore. He was part of a movement to help others. By the end of the meeting, Ryan was exhausted but inspired. Jack had given him a new perspective on the work they were doing, and for the first time, Ryan could see how he could bring his skills from the corporate world into the nonprofit world, not by focusing on the bottom line, but by focusing on the people they were serving. As they stood to leave, Jack clapped Ryan on the back. "You've got this, Ryan. Don't get bogged down by the details. Remember, it's all about the connections you make, the people you help. That's what makes the difference." Ryan nodded, feeling a sense of clarity that had been absent for so long. "Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate your advice. I think I'm starting to see how this all fits together." Jack smiled. "It's a journey. Just take it one step at a time. You're doing great already." Walking out of the coffee shop, Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jack's mentorship had opened his eyes to a new way of thinking, one that would guide him through the challenges that lay ahead. But more than that, it had given him the confidence to move forward, knowing that he didn't have to have all the answers. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt like he was on the right path. The world of business and profit-driven goals had its place, but this was where he truly belonged. He was learning, growing, and making a real difference. As the evening sun began to set, Ryan walked home with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. It was going to be a long road ahead, but now he had the right mindset and the right mentor to guide him through it. What new insights would Ryan gain from his time with Jack? How would this mentorship shape his role in the nonprofit project and his life moving forward? Stay tuned to see how Ryan's journey unfolds. The weeks that followed Ryan's meeting with Jack were filled with rapid growth and new realizations. The nonprofit initiative was gaining momentum, with more local businesses expressing interest in partnering. The energy around the project was palpable, and Ryan's role was becoming clearer. He was no longer just a participant. He was a leader, shaping the direction of something that had the potential to change lives. Jack continued to be a guiding figure, offering advice when Ryan needed it and providing perspective when the challenges of running a nonprofit seemed overwhelming. But with each day, Ryan realized that the deeper he got into this world, the more complex it became. One afternoon, Ryan found himself at a crossroads. He had just attended a meeting with a potential corporate partner, a well-known tech company looking to invest in social impact projects. The conversation had started off well, but halfway through, the representative from the company, a sharp-suited woman named Claire, dropped a bombshell. "We're interested in partnering," Claire said, "but there's a catch. We need a clear, quantifiable ROI for this project. It's all about numbers. How many people can we help, and what kind of impact can we measure? If we can't demonstrate that, it's going to be hard to justify this investment to our board." Ryan had been expecting this. The corporate world, after all, ran on metrics and numbers. But this request felt different. It felt cold. He had always worked in environments where the bottom line was the priority, but now, in the nonprofit world, the bottom line wasn't just about money. It was about human lives. Could he really balance the corporate need for numbers with the project's mission of providing real, meaningful support? The meeting ended with Claire promising to get back to him, but Ryan felt a knot forming in his stomach. What if the corporate world was still the driving force behind the project? Could he stick to the mission without compromising its integrity? Later that evening, as Ryan sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop, he decided to reach out to Jack. He needed advice. He needed perspective. Jack had seen it all. He would know what to do. "Jack, I've got a dilemma. I just met with a potential corporate partner, and they want concrete numbers and ROI. It feels like the focus is shifting from helping people to just making the project look good on paper. I don't want to lose sight of what we're doing here, but at the same time, we need funding. What should I do?" Ryan hesitated for a moment before hitting send. He didn't want to appear weak or unsure, but this was important. This was the challenge he had feared would come. Jack's response came quickly. "Ryan, this is a tough one. The reality is, you need both. You can't ignore the numbers entirely. They are part of the game. But you can frame those numbers in a way that reflects the true impact you're making. The key is to measure the right things. Success isn't just about how many people you help. It's about how deeply you help them. Keep the focus on people, but find a way to show that those people are thriving." Ryan read Jack's message several times. He understood what Jack was saying, but the task still felt daunting. How could he prove real, emotional impact in a way that would satisfy corporate interests? The next day, Ryan met with Emma to discuss the issue. He shared his concerns about the corporate focus on numbers, and she listened attentively, nodding as he spoke. "I get where you're coming from," Emma said thoughtfully. "We want to make sure we're staying true to our mission, but I also don't think we should shut out corporate partners who could help us grow. It's a balancing act, but if we can show that the numbers are aligned with human success, it might open more doors." Ryan frowned. "I just feel like there's a risk of losing the heart of the project. If we start focusing too much on ROI and metrics, it might change the entire dynamic of what we're trying to do." Emma leaned forward, her expression softening. "You're right to be cautious. But think about it this way. If we can prove the impact we're making, if we can show that people's lives are changing for the better, that will attract more funding, more partners, and more resources. And that means we can help even more people. It's not about compromising. It's about finding the right way to tell our story." Ryan let out a deep breath. "I just don't want to lose sight of why we're doing this in the first place." "You won't," Emma assured him. "You're the one keeping us grounded. You're the one who sees the bigger picture. The numbers will follow if we stay focused on the people. Ryan nodded slowly, still unsure but willing to give it a try. He trusted Emma's judgment, and he knew that her heart was in the right place. But the fear of losing the project's integrity lingered. A few days later, Ryan decided to put his new approach into action. He worked with the team to develop a system that would allow them to track both quantitative and qualitative results. They would measure the number of people helped, yes, but also the depth of that help, how their lives had changed in terms of stability, dignity, and future opportunities. They would find a way to capture the emotional and social transformations that couldn't always be measured in dollars and cents. The next meeting with Claire and the tech company was set for the following week. Ryan felt a mix of determination and anxiety as he prepared for it. He had to show them that the project was worth their investment, but he also had to remain true to the heart of what they were doing. When the meeting finally arrived, Ryan was ready. He presented the data, showing both the numbers of people the project had impacted and the qualitative improvements in their lives. He shared stories of individuals who had found new employment, families who had been reunited, and those who had regained their dignity. It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about transformation. Claire seemed impressed, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed the charts and figures. "I see what you're doing here, Ryan. This is different. You're showing the real, lasting impact, not just a snapshot of success. I think we can work with this." Ryan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had found the balance between the numbers and the heart of the project. The corporate world didn't have to take over. It could support what they were already building. Later that night, Ryan sat on his balcony, looking out over the city. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in a while, Ryan felt at peace. He had navigated the challenge, and he had stayed true to the project's mission. He wasn't just chasing numbers, he was helping people. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Would the balance Ryan found between numbers and impact hold in the long term? And how would the success of the project shape his future? Stay tuned to see how Ryan continues to navigate this new world and what lies ahead in his journey. After the successful partnership with the tech company, Ryan's world seemed to shift. The nonprofit project was finally taking off. New funding, new partnerships, and more people reaching out to offer their support. What started as a modest effort to help the homeless reintegrate into society had transformed into a full-scale initiative with the potential to make a real impact on a larger scale. Ryan felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before, and his worries seemed to dissipate with each passing day. But the growth was not without its complications. The influx of new partners and increased attention brought a host of new challenges. The pressure to maintain the momentum was mounting, and Ryan felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The success of the project meant that expectations were high, and those expectations were about to get even higher. One afternoon, Ryan received a call that would change everything. It was from Claire, the representative from the tech company. "Ryan," she said, her tone more serious than usual, "we've been discussing your project internally, and there's a lot of interest. In fact, there's an opportunity to take this initiative national. We've got some key stakeholders who are ready to back this on a much larger scale. But here's the catch. We need you to expand the project fast." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. The words "expand fast" echoed in his mind. "National?" he asked, trying to process the enormity of what she was saying. "You mean you want us to roll this out in other cities?" "That's right. We've got cities lined up, and if you can prove that this model works in a larger market, we'll secure even more funding. Think bigger, Ryan. Think about the reach this could have. The people you could help." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, a chance to make a nationwide difference. But the idea of expanding so quickly made him uneasy. He wasn't sure if they were ready for that kind of growth. "I need some time to think about this," Ryan replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. Claire agreed to give him a few days to consider the offer. As soon as the call ended, Ryan felt a sense of dread settle in. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this level of expansion, but the opportunity was undeniable. It was a chance to reach thousands, maybe even millions, of people who could benefit from the program. The next few days were filled with restless nights and long hours of contemplation. Ryan spoke to Emma, Jack, and even a few close friends to get their input, but no matter how many perspectives he heard, the decision was still his to make. Jack had cautioned him about the dangers of growing too quickly without fully understanding the infrastructure required to sustain such growth. Emma, on the other hand, saw the opportunity as a chance to change the game entirely. "Ryan," Emma said one evening as they sat in her office reviewing project reports, "this is the moment we've been waiting for. This could take the project to places we never imagined. If we're careful, if we plan it right, we can handle the growth. It's about scaling smart, not scaling blindly." Ryan sighed. "I get that, but it's not just about adding more cities. We're talking about people's lives here. This project is personal. If we move too fast, we could end up doing more harm than good." "I hear you," Emma said, her tone empathetic, "but I think you've got the vision to make this work. You know the importance of personal connection, and that's what will make this different from any other project. We'll stay true to that." Ryan took a deep breath, his mind finally made up. He knew that the project had always been about more than just numbers, more than just an opportunity to grow. It had always been about the people, the individuals who had struggled with homelessness, who had fought to rebuild their lives. This expansion wasn't just a chance to reach more people. It was a chance to offer real change to communities that needed it most. He picked up the phone and called Claire. "I'm in," Ryan said. "Let's make it happen." The next few months were a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and late nights. The team had to navigate the complexities of rolling out the project to other cities. There were logistical hurdles, legal hurdles, and of course, the challenge of maintaining the personal touch that had made the project successful in the first place. But with Emma's leadership and Jack's guidance, Ryan found the strength to push forward. By the time the first new city was officially added to the project's roster, Ryan had learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Growth, true growth, wasn't about expanding as quickly as possible. It was about understanding the impact of each new step, each new initiative. It was about making sure that the integrity of the mission was never compromised, no matter how big the project became. As the months passed and the project grew, Ryan's confidence in his role as a leader grew as well. He had faced the fear of losing control, of compromising the mission for the sake of growth. But he had navigated that fear, and in the process, had found a new sense of purpose. His vision for the project had not changed. He was still focused on helping people, on giving them the tools they needed to rebuild their lives. And that was something that no corporate partner, no amount of funding, and no city expansion could ever take away. One night, as Ryan sat in his office reviewing a report on the progress in the new cities, he received a message from Jack. "Hey Ryan, just wanted to check in. How's everything going?" Ryan paused for a moment before typing a response. "It's going great. It's been a crazy ride, but I think we're doing it right. There are challenges, but we're making it work. I'm learning a lot, Jack. Thanks for everything." Jack's reply came almost immediately. "You're doing great, Ryan. Just remember, it's not about the scale. It's about the people. Stay focused on that, and the rest will follow." Ryan smiled as he read the message. He knew Jack was right. No matter how big the project got, he couldn't lose sight of the most important part, the people they were helping. What new lessons would Ryan learn as the project expanded even further? Could he maintain the heart of the initiative while managing its rapid growth? Stay tuned to see how Ryan's journey continues to unfold and the new challenges that await him. The rapid expansion of the nonprofit was nothing short of exhilarating for Ryan. Each new city brought with it unique challenges, but it also proved that the project was scalable. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Families were getting back on their feet, and local communities were starting to see the tangible impact of the program. It felt as though everything was aligning perfectly. But just when Ryan thought they were on the path to success, an unexpected test emerged, one that would challenge his faith in the project and his leadership more than anything else. It started with a series of complaints that began trickling in from one of the new cities, a mid-sized town in the Midwest. At first, Ryan thought it was just an isolated issue, a misunderstanding or a minor oversight that could be easily fixed. However, as more complaints came in, it became clear that something larger was at play. The most disturbing of all came from a local partner who had been instrumental in helping them get the project off the ground in the area. The partner, a well-respected social worker named Sarah, had sent a scathing email that caught Ryan off guard. "I don't know how to say this, but the program isn't working here. We've had issues with funding delays, staffing shortages, and, worst of all, the participants feel like they're being treated as numbers, not people. I thought we were going to make a difference here, but right now, I'm not seeing it. The people we're trying to help deserve better." Ryan's stomach dropped when he read the message. He had always believed that the personal touch was key to the program's success. But now, in the face of this criticism, Ryan wondered if they had indeed grown too fast. Had they lost sight of the very core of what made the project special? He immediately called Emma and explained the situation. After hearing the details, Emma was equally concerned. "This is bad, Ryan. Sarah's been with us from the beginning, and if she's saying this, we need to take it seriously. We can't afford to have one bad experience taint the whole program." Ryan nodded, his mind racing. He knew they had to address the issue quickly before it snowballed. "I'll fly out there tomorrow. I need to see what's going on for myself. We can't let this go unchecked." The next morning, Ryan boarded a flight to the Midwest. As he sat in the cramped seat, his thoughts were a whirlpool of doubt. Was this the beginning of something bigger? Could the program really handle the complexity of nationwide expansion, or had they bitten off more than they could chew? When Ryan arrived in the city, Sarah met him at the airport. She was a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, but her eyes were filled with concern. "I'm glad you're here, Ryan," Sarah said as they shook hands. "There's a lot we need to talk about." They drove to the local center where the program was being run. The facility was modest, a former warehouse converted into temporary housing for the homeless, with a few rooms set up for job training and counseling. The building had the potential to be something more, but as Ryan stepped inside, he could immediately feel the tension in the air. The workers were moving quickly, but there was an underlying sense of disorganization. People weren't interacting as they had in other cities, and the sense of community that had been the hallmark of their success seemed to be missing. "I'm sorry to show you this, Ryan," Sarah said quietly as they walked through the facility, "but it's not the way we envisioned it. The participants feel like they're just going through the motions. They're not being treated as individuals anymore. It's all about getting the numbers up." Ryan's heart sank as he took in the scene. This wasn't what he had wanted. This wasn't what he had promised the people they were helping. He had to find a solution, fast. After spending the afternoon talking with the staff and participants, Ryan felt exhausted, but he also felt a renewed sense of determination. He could see the problem clearly now. They had scaled too quickly without properly establishing the systems needed to maintain the level of care that had made the program successful in its earlier stages. They had focused on expanding their reach, but neglected the foundation that had made them unique. As he sat down to a meeting with Sarah and the staff, Ryan knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to fix this. "We've made a mistake," Ryan began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "We've expanded too fast, and we've lost sight of what really matters. This isn't just about helping as many people as possible. It's about making sure we're truly making a difference in their lives. I'm not going to let this program become another number-driven project. We're going to fix this." Sarah looked at him, her expression skeptical but hopeful. "What do you suggest?" Ryan took a deep breath. "We need to slow down. I know that's the last thing anyone wants to hear, but we have to go back to the basics. We're going to re-establish our community model. We'll take a step back in this city, put the right people in place, and make sure that every participant is treated as an individual. We'll rebuild this from the ground up, but we need to do it right." Over the next few weeks, Ryan worked closely with Sarah and the local team to restructure the program. They started by re-engaging with the participants on a personal level, ensuring that each person received individualized support. They took a hard look at staffing and made sure that the right people were in place to provide the quality care they had promised. They slowed the expansion process and focused on strengthening the current cities, knowing that growth without a solid foundation would only lead to more problems. As the weeks went by, the results began to show. The participants felt heard again, the staff felt supported, and the program regained its sense of purpose. It wasn't easy. There were still setbacks and moments of doubt, but Ryan knew they were on the right path. The test that had threatened to unravel everything had, in the end, made the project stronger. Ryan had learned a crucial lesson. Growth was important, but it had to be sustainable. There was no shortcut to success. As Ryan boarded the flight back to his city, he reflected on the lessons learned. The project was no longer just an idea. It was a living, breathing initiative that had to be nurtured every step of the way. And while the journey ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, Ryan knew that he was now more equipped to face them. Could the project continue to grow while maintaining its core values? And how would Ryan's leadership evolve as the stakes got higher? The next chapter of the story was just beginning. Months passed since Ryan had successfully turned around the project in the Midwest, and things were starting to settle. The program had regained its balance, and people were beginning to believe in it again. Staff, participants, and partners alike. But as the dust settled, new questions began to arise. The path forward was clearer, but it wasn't going to be any easier. Ryan's thoughts often returned to the challenges of the past, wondering if they were truly prepared for what lay ahead. There was one thing he knew for sure, though: they couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. As much as he had wanted to scale quickly, the focus now was on ensuring that the program's growth was sustainable, impactful, and rooted in the values they had set out with from the very beginning. Then came the next test. A proposal had been sent from one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the country. They had heard about the project's success and were interested in providing funding for national expansion, an even bigger opportunity than the tech company deal. This time, the foundation wanted Ryan and his team to consider rolling out the program in every major city in the U.S. within the next 2 years. Ryan sat at his desk, staring at the proposal. It was tempting. More funding meant more people could be helped, more cities reached, more lives changed, but there was a heavy weight in his heart. This time, he wasn't just reacting out of excitement or ambition. This time, he was thinking about the bigger picture, about the long-term implications of such a decision. Was it too soon to expand again? "Hey, Ryan," Emma's voice came from the doorway. He looked up to see her standing there, a concerned expression on her face. He sighed and gestured for her to come in. "I don't know what to do, Emma. We've been presented with an amazing opportunity, but I'm not sure if we're ready. This is huge." Emma took a seat, folding her arms thoughtfully. "I can see why this is tough. You've been through so much to get this far, and it's understandable to want to keep pushing forward. But you're right to be cautious. We've learned a lot about what happens when you scale too quickly." Ryan nodded, relieved that Emma understood. "Exactly. We can't just accept any offer because it's there. I need to know we can handle the growth without losing what's important. I don't want to see the program become another corporate-driven initiative where the people we're trying to help just get lost in the numbers." Emma smiled reassuringly. "I think we've proven that we can grow with purpose. You've been making the right decisions all along, Ryan. But maybe now, it's time to put together a solid strategy. Maybe we don't take on every city at once. Maybe we slow things down even more and focus on building an infrastructure that can support this level of growth." Ryan leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. "We've already seen that we can't just rush into things. It's not just about funding or exposure. It's about building a system that can last. I want to make sure that every new city we add is as effective as the first ones we started with. We can't lose sight of that." "That's the key, Ryan," Emma agreed. "This can be the opportunity we've been waiting for, but we need to be smart about it." They spent the next few hours discussing the specifics of the proposal and how they might approach it strategically. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. They would only accept the funding if they could create a phased implementation strategy that focused on carefully growing the program in stages. They would start with a few more cities, ensuring that the infrastructure and community support were in place, and gradually scale as the program proved it could handle larger numbers without compromising quality. Ryan felt a sense of calm as they finalized the details. It was a measured approach, one that reflected the lessons they had learned over the past year. It was about growth, but not at the expense of the program's soul. A few weeks later, Ryan and Emma presented their strategy to the philanthropic foundation. It wasn't easy. There were concerns about the slower pace of expansion, but the team's unwavering commitment to the program's values won them over. The foundation agreed to fund their phased plan, recognizing that this was a long-term investment, not just a quick win. With the funding secured, Ryan was able to implement the first phase of the expansion. It was a slow burn, but it felt right. They carefully selected the next cities to expand into, ensuring that each location had the resources, community involvement, and capacity to support the program. They worked closely with local partners, adapting the model to fit the unique needs of each community. And as the program slowly expanded, Ryan saw the difference it made. Each new city that joined the initiative was stronger for it, more connected, and more personalized than anything he had seen in the rush of the first few expansions. The program wasn't just about adding more cities. It was about building something sustainable, something that would last long after the initial excitement had faded. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Ryan sat down in his office, looking out at the skyline. He thought about the journey, how far they had come and how much more was still to be done. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. He had started this journey wanting to help people. Now, he was seeing the fruits of that labor, one city at a time. As he sat in the quiet of his office, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jack. "Hey, Ryan. Just wanted to say you're doing an amazing job. Keep it up." Ryan smiled and typed back a quick reply. "Thanks, Jack. Couldn't have done it without you." And for the first time in a long while, Ryan felt certain that they were on the right path. The future was still uncertain, but he knew that with each step forward, they were building something real. And that was all that mattered. Would this slower, more deliberate expansion lead to lasting success? And what other challenges would Ryan face as the project grew even further? Stay tuned to find out. The journey had been long and tumultuous, but Ryan stood at the helm of a project that had blossomed into something much greater than he had ever imagined. The program had expanded across the country, touching the lives of thousands of people. The careful, methodical pace of the last few months had paid off, and the program was now more resilient, more grounded, and more impactful than it had ever been. But as always, there was the question of what came next. Ryan sat at his desk, staring out the window of his high-rise office, reflecting on how far they had come. He had witnessed the transformation of a scrappy, grassroots project into a national force for change. The organization was not just providing temporary shelter and food anymore. It was giving people the tools to build sustainable lives. This was the dream that had kept him awake many nights. Now, it was a reality. But as his team worked tirelessly on the final phase of expansion, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. They had built a great program, yes, but was it enough? Was it truly making the kind of lasting impact he had envisioned when he first started this journey? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Hey, Ryan, got a minute?" It was Emma, her expression as calm and composed as always, but there was a sense of urgency in her voice. "Of course," Ryan said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind?" Emma sat down, a folder in her hands. "I've been looking at the final reports for the cities we've expanded into, and there's something interesting happening. We're seeing success, no doubt, but there's a recurring theme. The people who have been with the program the longest, those who've been through the most challenges, are now the ones mentoring others." Ryan leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Some of our earliest participants, people who once relied on the program for basic survival, are now giving back. They're showing up to mentor the newer participants, helping them find jobs, teaching them life skills. It's incredible." Ryan's heart swelled with pride. This was the moment he had been hoping for. The program wasn't just helping people get back on their feet. It was empowering them to lift others up as well. It was the full-circle transformation he had dreamed about, but never truly expected to see. "That's amazing," Ryan said, his voice filled with awe. "It's exactly what we've been working toward." Emma smiled. "And it's happening. Slowly, but surely, we're creating a culture of giving back. People are paying it forward, Ryan. That's the kind of change that lasts." Ryan stood up, walking to the window and looking out over the city. The lights twinkled below, a reminder of how vast their impact had become. He had come so far, from that first meeting with Jack, to the slow and steady expansion, to the setbacks and the inevitable challenges. It had all led to this point: a sustainable program, a community of people supporting each other, and a legacy that would continue to grow. But as he stood there, Ryan realized that while the project had reached a remarkable place, there was still more to do. He couldn't just sit back and rest on his laurels. There were still so many people to help, so many cities to reach. "What's next, Emma?" he asked, turning to face her. "How do we keep this going?" Emma stood up, a look of determination in her eyes. We keep pushing forward, just like we always have. But we also need to think about sustainability on a larger scale. We need to invest in the future, training the next generation of leaders within the program, ensuring that this is something that lasts long after we're gone. Ryan nodded, a fire reigniting in his chest. You're right. This isn't just about expanding the program. It's about creating a movement. A movement that doesn't need us to survive, but one that lives on because it's in the hands of people who believe in it as much as we do. And with that, they set to work. The next few months were filled with new challenges, but also new opportunities. They worked tirelessly to build a stronger, more sustainable infrastructure for the future. The focus shifted to empowering the participants who had been transformed by the program, giving them the tools and training they needed to take on leadership roles. Ryan and Emma knew that if they could create a system where the people they helped were also the ones running the program, the impact would multiply exponentially. The program's success began to ripple outward. The stories of transformation became more than just feel-good moments. They became the foundation of a nationwide movement. News outlets began to cover the initiative, shining a light on the power of community-driven change. Corporations, nonprofits, and local governments took notice, offering their support to help scale the initiative even further. But for Ryan, the greatest reward came when he visited one of the cities where the program had taken root the deepest. It had been a few years since he had first visited the area, and this time, he was there to see the results of the program's sustainability. As he walked through the facility, he was greeted by faces he recognized. Former participants who were now leading workshops, running community outreach programs, and supporting those still in need. Ryan couldn't help but smile as he saw the transformation happening before his eyes. The program had come full circle, and it was no longer just about him or his team. It was about the community of people who had worked together to make it all possible. As the day came to a close, Ryan sat down with a group of program participants turned leaders. They spoke about their journey, their struggles, and the hope that had been reignited within them. "I never thought I'd be here, Ryan," one of the leaders said, a woman named Laura who had once been homeless herself. "But this program, this community, it changed my life. And now, I'm here helping others find the same path." Ryan smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "This is why we do it. You're proof that we're on the right track." And with that, he knew that the program had come full circle. It had evolved into something far more powerful than he had ever envisioned. It was no longer just a solution for homelessness. It was a testament to the power of resilience, community, and hope. The journey had been long, but in the end, it was all worth it. As Ryan looked out at the faces of those who had come so far, he couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter of this story look like? But for now, it was enough to know that they had made a lasting difference.